Hello there, it is Nick. I hope you've been doing well since the last time we talked. So in today's video, I wanted to do more of a stream of conscious type video because this topic I want to cover today has been weighing on my mind a lot more recently. And it's something I've been kind of going back and forth with for about a year, maybe 2 years at this point. And I have really flip-flopped on this issue from a long time ago until recently. And the issue is regarding which companies and which brands, which businesses I support, and which ones I give my money to. And of course, in the wake of a lot of things that have been happening recently, whatever side you're on, I think this is a good conversation for everyone to have. And I want to open up this dialogue to as many people as I can, especially audiences that I talk to regularly. So the struggle is when a company that you've been using, supporting, whatever, for a long time, maybe it's a company or a business that involves family or friends or people you like, at what point or what are your thresholds for when you eventually need to pull the plug on your support financially of the business, company, brand, whatever you want to call it? And it's been a struggle for me recently because I'll give a few examples, but in general, I personally don't agree with certain popular trends right now. You can probably figure it out what it is from watching my channel or whatever. And I don't agree with certain actions by large companies, even social media companies that I've used for a decade, more than a decade. So I think it's easy to be black and white, no pun intended, on these issues. And I've been trying to kind of set boundaries for myself that are reasonable, but also that address the side of me that is against certain things without compromising things that I support, if that makes sense. So for instance, if a company that has a good product is associated with a family member of mine, and I like the product, I am willing to overlook some of the political decisions, some of the business decisions that I don't necessarily agree with personally, if it means that the family member is benefiting more than what the company itself is gaining from it. With that said, doesn't mean I'm not going to be outspoken about it or give feedback to that company if it's brought up that they want feedback as far as what's happening. And if I am questioned about certain things regarding the company, I'm not afraid to speak up. Because personally, I have to kind of deal with this on a daily basis personally, because the company or the organization I work for, with, whatever you want to call it, I don't agree with everything they do either, but I can't just get up and quit because I agree with the mess or the goals of the company, and that's why I joined. I knew that it wasn't perfect, and in light of what's happening recently, it seems that it's going to be even more of a struggle going forward, but I feel it is my duty to speak up about it at least and tell them or explain to them maybe why this is not the way to go and point out some things maybe they haven't seen or they're not seeing. So that was one example. Another example recently is along those same, actually I'll just leave that in the family category. As far as social media goes, that was another area where I had to figure out a compromise here, because from what we know now, if you are more on the conservative side of the political spectrum, more on the free speech supporting, open dialogue supporting side of an argument, you are more likely to be censored or more likely to be banned or shadow banned, whatever you call it, censored, put on a blacklist, whatever you want to call it, by big tech companies that have huge influences on our society, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, Reddit. I'm trying to think of all the other ones. Those seem to be the bigger ones. You can probably think of other ones, Patreon, any of those other big tech social media type platforms that enable us to communicate with each other more easily, they have been involved for a while now, but we're really just seeing the results of their involvement politically around the globe. And so for me, in that case, what I did was I picked the social media platforms that I couldn't, quote unquote, live without, that I couldn't live without. So for me, I chose Google's YouTube platform, and then I found an alternative to Twitter and Facebook and Instagram called Parler. So luckily, or not luckily, one thing that's a reality with me is I have always struggled to stay in touch with people throughout the years. And I've finally come to the conclusion that it's maybe because we've lost, with certain people, I've lost the connection because the interests that we once had or that brought us together or had our paths crossed no longer were a part of that relationship. So that's why you're not really staying connected with those people. Luckily, the people that obviously that you want to stay in touch with, normally you have a phone number or some other way to contact them outside of social media. So that was an easy way for me to make that decision. Or someone who knows someone who, if they need to get in contact with you, they will. And so, not that I don't like those people, but it's just a natural part of life where people come in and out of your life, and the ones that stick around kind of thing, right? It's a two-way street. So that made that decision a little bit easier because I had contact information for people that if I needed to get in contact with them or if I want to reconnect with them outside of those social media platforms, I could. So what I did was I chose Parler and Google's YouTube. But what I did as a compromise was, one, I deleted completely my Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook accounts, Snapchat, any other social media platform besides YouTube and Parler. What I also did was, because we know Google is a huge part of our everyday lives, from email to Google Maps to Google Images, Google News, Google Search, I tried to switch as many of their products over as I could right away, which was I switched from the Google search to DuckDuckGo, which is a great alternative, and I've been using it for a while. And I switched from Chrome to Brave, which is linked to DuckDuckGo, but it's its own browser. And so those two were the alternatives I found were best for me right now. I could always switch to a different one later, but for me, I wanted to switch away from putting my Google search or my search engine searches away from these big tech companies that I don't necessarily agree with. So that way, I'm giving them the least amount of my time and money as I can. And so I'm looking also at some American-made alternatives to email. I know that's going to be probably a pretty hefty task because most of our passwords and accounts are associated with an email. And I started using Google Mail in college. I switched away from Outlook, which is Microsoft, which is hard to get away from. And so that was kind of my next step. And then I'm looking at that, like I said, and YouTube until I feel like on here I'm comfortable with using an alternative that I feel like is legitimate and I feel is working for me or whatever, or would work for me, and then I will switch it over. But of course I'll let you know and everything. And I'm working on a way to kind of build up that the link that will connect between YouTube and an alternative platform to make sure that it's not any more or less smooth than it could be, if that makes any sense, without kind of removing any of the meaning or quality or connectivity, whatever it may be, or giving people options outside of switching over if they don't want to switch over. So anyways, that's kind of another thing. As far as my products I use, I'm being a little more conscious of where I shop when I can, what I buy when I feel like I can or where it's necessary to me, because I feel like money is power, like I've been talking about this whole video, and what I do with my wallet is important. Even just one person, if I can start doing something to help that, then I feel it is powerful. And of course, private industries, I think, should be able to do whatever they want. I think if they want to say, hey, we want to hire this certain person with this certain look, this certain skin color, I think they should be able to be completely honest. I know it's like, wait, you don't, because I'm very open about saying I don't really care what color your skin is. I don't care what gender you are. If you do the job well and you do it better than everyone else, then I want to work with you or work for you, whatever it is. But if it's a private company, I think you should be able to do any of that, because I don't think the government should be able to tell you not to do that. Granted, and the reason I'm saying that now is because it seems as if that law that is in place to prevent workplaces from discriminating based on sex, religion, gender, race, sexual orientation, whatever is involved in that law, has kind of been thrown out the door recently, because a lot of companies are now coming out saying they are consciously hiring certain races over others to quote unquote fix the gender or the racial inequality or the gender inequality or whatever it may be. So to me, it's kind of like that law, to me, is more of an all or nothing type thing, where either you don't discriminate at all against any of those categories or you do. So I'm thinking, okay, if they're a private industry, they should be able to do whatever they want, right? As far as like a public entity goes, the law says what the law says. So if they're not following that, I think that's a big problem and kind of makes it null and void. I don't know. It's a very complex issue. The final thing I wanted to say was I record these videos on my Microsoft Surface with a microphone attached, and it has Microsoft Word on it. So from what I know, there are alternatives to that. So I'm looking into that. So when it is time for me to get a new computer and whatnot, then I will switch products and operating systems away from a big tech company that I don't necessarily agree with. So I think it's a process, is what I'm kind of thinking out loud here as, but I want to know what you think about this. Like, because I'll end on this really. My personality is very all or nothing. And I'm finding obviously that it doesn't always work, and sometimes that can work against you. So I've had to find the middle ground on what am I willing to compromise on and where do I draw the line. And I found that some things you can switch over pretty easily, and some things there aren't very many alternatives to what's out there, or maybe not yet, but we're working towards it. If a few people start getting the ball rolling, and then it builds from there. So I think the change that needs to happen, or the what should I say, people putting their money where their mouth is, if you will, is on its way to being a widespread thing. I think there's a lot of a long ways to go is the word I'm thinking of. But I just wanted to come on here and ask you kind of what you think of this. Have you come across instances where you've had to really almost ignore some of your personal feelings about something and bite the bullet and do it anyway, especially regarding your money and the way you spend things and some necessities, essentials that you need to live your life? I want to know what you think. So I hope if you've been having some of the same struggles as me, that maybe this made you feel less alone. And I'm looking forward to kind of hopefully having less of these battles, and maybe a lot of the kind of contradictory, dumb, if you will, kind of what was I thinking moments will happen with a lot of these companies that are kind of speaking out of their butt to satisfy a trend or satisfy a mob or whatever it may be. And maybe they'll come around, because I think a lot of the stuff that's happening right now that appears to be progressive and good is actually going to be more hurtful in the long run, because a lot of it is being touted as kind of one thing, but really it's actually the thing that they're bashing is it's actually working the opposite direction. Anyways, I'll leave it at that.